This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
This country in general, we really struggle in talking about grief. We don't know what to say. And so too often, we don't say anything at all. And part of what Mi Alma's mission is, in addition to providing support for the family and memories and longevity, is really changing the way that we talk about grief, the way we accept grief, so that that journey is more acceptable, is more, frankly, just more understood, because it's such a part of the human experience.
This is the Heart of Hospice podcast with Helen Bauer. Today's guest is Jordan Arogeti, the co-founder of Mi Alma, a site offering tools and resources for when your life gets turned upside down. Whether you're a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, the Heart of Hospice is here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care. I love my guest today. She has this incredible insight into problem solving, and you're going to see why when you hear what she talks about. Jordan Arogeti is the co-founder of Mi Alma, a centralized support platform for those experiencing loss. Mi Alma, the name of her company, is Spanish for my soul, and you're going to hear the story behind that and why that's so meaningful for them. The site was built for families that are either about to lose a loved one or recently have lost someone. A Mi Alma page gives clear directions to anyone inclined to offer funds, food, time, or energy to those who are grieving. It also provides a dedicated space to collect and save forever any speeches, stories, pictures, or memories of the deceased from everybody that knew them. It's an amazing site. Jordan co-founded with her husband, Scott, based on their own personal experiences, and you'll hear her talk about her grandfather. She calls him Big Pop, her experience with him at end of life, and conserving and saving these wonderful memories of him. He was a U.S. military veteran, and so now Mi Alma has a page for him where even her children's children, the generations to come, can read about her grandfather, read about Big Pop and who he was and his legacy. So sit back and enjoy my conversation with Jordan Arogeti of Mi Alma. Jordan Arogeti from Mi Alma, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
It's nice to see your smiling face. Sometimes I wish we captured the video because it is nice to connect with my guests this way and see you smile.
Thank you.
I'm going to start with an icebreaker question just to kind of get us going.
Sure.
What is one small thing about you that most people don't know?
That's a good question.
I really like this question because some people, sometimes they kind of laugh a little bit and you can tell they're trying to decide, should I actually say this or not?
There's a lot of things I could say. I would say the one I'll share today is that I am named for Michael Jordan. My dad grew up in Wilmington, North Carolina. I am a huge North Carolina Tar Heels fan, and he named me, or both my parents named me after Michael Jordan. So that's my fun fact.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I am a huge basketball fan. So I don't know if I really had a choice, but it's in the name.
I wonder if that could get you some shoes. To write in and say, hey, my parents named me for you.
Yeah.
Could I get some free shoes?
Yes, I'll do my best. But yeah, that's That's my fun fact or my icebreaker.
I love it. I love it. So we're going to jump in and start talking about Mi Alma, which I'm sure is your favorite thing to talk about these days.
It is.
Tell me how Mi Alma got started and what was your motivation?
Yeah. So my husband and I started this together about 2 years ago. And it had been something we had talked about really since we got married for a few reasons. One, my husband never got to meet his maternal grandparents. They died before he was born. And growing up with his dad's side, he had 30 plus years with his dad's dad. His dad's mom is thankfully still with us. And he'd often talk about how strange it was that he knew so much more about one set of grandparents than the other. Why was there no place to go to learn about not just where they were born and where they lived, but who they were and where was there a place to capture like the essence and the impact of the types of people they were and the impact they had on their community. And then the second part was that as we've been married, like many, we've attended, unfortunately, our share of funerals and memorial services. And the experience of going through loss has always felt a little incomplete, both as people that have been grievers and supporters. When we looked out at the tools available to connect the two together, they always felt a little fragmented and antiquated. So we thought to ourselves, gosh, there's an idea here that could be really powerful in bridging the disconnect between grievers and supporters. And then the last impetus was really COVID. All the loss, the death, the grieving and isolation, people truly just vanishing. And we thought, gosh, how horrible is it that these folks don't get to share their stories? So I come from a startup background, and we thought to ourselves, okay, well, if the tools available to us don't seem sufficient, let's just build it ourselves. And so we did.
I love it. I love it. And let's face it, the traditional obituary, even when it's done very lovingly, very respectfully, robust on a website for a funeral home or one of those, obituary websites, it's not the same as having these gatherings where we get to share with each other and remember when, or I haven't seen you since we did this. And the pandemic really took that away from us.
That's absolutely right. We lost a sense of connection, and there's too many memories and stories that weren't shared that can't be preserved for those families' future generations. And so much of what Mi Alma is the sense of intergenerational connection. That's super important to me as a mother. If I don't know the stories of my grandparents, how can I ever explain it to my children so that they have a sense of connection to their roots?
Exactly. So tell me exactly how Mi Alma works. Explain the structure and the programs that you offer.
So Mi Alma is a centralized support service for anyone experiencing loss. And what we do is we provide really there's three components of the platform. Number one is what we call a support registry. Much like a baby or a wedding registry, grievers have very significant needs, either in anticipation and end of life or right after someone's passing. The needs look a little different than the traditional registry you would go to. So it's not pillows and silverware, but maybe it's funds for a funeral or for a memorial service. Perhaps they have needs in terms of food, to gift cards like Grubhub or Uber Eats. Or maybe it's more simple than that. Maybe it's simply time and energy, and there's needs around the house, mowing the lawn, walking the dog, going through the person's belongings. So one component of Mi Alma is what we call our support registry. It is the place that gives clear direction to anyone who's inclined to take action to support the family. So that chaos that ensues whenever anyone dies, we're looking to kind of bridge that by bringing some order to it. So now there's one single place that everyone just knows to go so they can take meaningful action towards the family. The second part of the platform is around simply communication. When someone dies, some of the first questions you hear is, when is the funeral? Where is it? I'd like to go. So we want to be able to inform the community of those details. And then the last part of it, which is my personal favorite, is what we call our modern memory wall. We've learned from years of discovery that the greatest currency to a family is to learn about their loved one through the eyes of everyone they touched. So through Mi Alma, with our what we call our collaboration link, anyone with that link can now contribute pictures, stories, videos, and we do so in a way that allows you to get more deep than you would on a funeral home website or even a Facebook post. Typically when you go to those forums, you see one of 5 things. So sorry for your loss, thoughts and prayers. And while certainly those are well-intended comments, we believe that supporters have stories. They have things to say, but no one's asking them in a way that makes it easy and comfortable. So on our modern memory wall, we have prompts that make it much, much simpler, much more comfortable for the supporter to share something more meaningful. So now the family can be the recipient of these stories as they're learning about their loved one in this 360-degree view of someone that can be preserved in perpetuity.
What are some of the examples of the prompts that Mi Alma offers to people who are going to put things up there?
Yeah. What's the funniest thing that you remember about them? What's something that future generations should know about them? How do you think they would like to be remembered? When was the first time you met this person? So again, just trying to draw things out in a way that's more conversational, because too often, and I'm sure you've seen this in your own experience as well, this country in general, we really struggle in talking about grief. We don't know what to say. And so too often, we don't say anything at all. And part of what Mi Alma's mission is, in addition to providing support for the family and memories and longevity, is really changing the way that we talk about grief, the way we accept grief, so that that journey is more acceptable, is more, frankly, just more understood, because it's such a part of the human experience.
I think we have this tendency as supporters, as you call us, of someone who's grieving to think, I'm going to make them sad if I say this.
Right.
And I think it's really important to remember they're already sad.
They are.
They have not forgotten that their person has died. You're not going to jog their memory and, oh, yeah, I forgot Dad died a week ago. They already know this. They're sitting in it. And can you imagine feeling that isolation, that nobody feels this grief the way I do? Nobody is sharing or treasuring these memories. Nobody's reminiscing. And then lo and behold, get to log into Mi Alma to look at a profile and hear all these people that have shared stories.
That's
this
right.
is what I did with this loved one. Yeah, I think it's amazing. And there are legacy sites,
Yeah.
and there are Mealtrain sites, and you can, nickel and dime it, piecemeal it out to be able to support people who are grieving. But Mi Alma has a unique way of pulling it all together.
That's right. We consolidate in many ways the tools that people are already familiar with, whether that be a GoFundMe, a Mealtrain, a funeral home website, even Facebook in some components, or even CaringBridge for those that are familiar with them. So what we're looking to do is to be the single place that everyone just knows to go when someone is ill, at the end of life, or when someone has passed, so that we can almost shield the grievers from the inevitable amount of questions that they'll be fielding of, when is this and where is this and how can I help? And do you want this casserole? Do you not want this casserole? I'll tell you, one of the things that we've learned is that, and we do a very nice job of this inside of the platform and on the profiles. If a family doesn't want something, we're actually very clear in the support registry. The family has declined this. Because what we've learned is that it's just as important to tell people what they do want and what they don't want. Because too often you're looking to kind of fill in based off of what you think might be appropriate or not. We really want to provide some clarity to the community at large, so that when you take that action, it is more meaningful. It feels like you've done something that can be helpful. And again, it's not just for the days and weeks after someone dies. It's hopefully much, much longer than that, because grief, as we know, lasts much longer. And for the grieving family, it really sets in almost 3 to 4 weeks after the person has died, after the attention has kind of begun to wane. And that's one of the things that we want to make better.
Yeah, there's a season of busyness is what I call it, right after someone dies, because you've got business to take care of that keeps you occupied. So at Mi Alma, you guys call this meaningful generosity and empathy over engagement. What do you mean by those particular terms?
Yeah. I mean, I think meaningful generosity is doing what the family really needs and not what you want to do. I think that we have a tendency to kind of slip into our own traditions, whether that's sending flowers or, making a casserole. We've talked to thousands of grievers throughout this process of building this company, and they'll tell us those are not the things we want. I'm so sick of casseroles. I'm so sick of food. Right. And while I say to them, okay, well, what is it that you need? It's like, I need someone to hold my hand while I go through my husband's belongings. I need someone to take my kids to school on Thursday because that was the drop off he used to do. And so meaningful generosity is tapping into the true needs of the family, so that when people are inclined to give help, it's help in a way that's truly impactful, not kind of checking it off your list. Okay, I've supported this family, I can move on. It's really being there for the person in a way that meets them where they are. And then empathy over engagement. Look, we know that we are stepping into some very sensitive waters. Death, grief are not very it's not an easy topic for many people. So for us as a company, it is extremely important that everything we do is based off of authenticity, intentionality, relationships. And so that any interaction you have with Mi Alma is led with empathy and not this sense of, we want you to use this and we want you to share this. We want people to use Mi Alma as they see fit. Whatever is comfortable for them, for their family, for their community. Our desires are irrelevant to the needs of the family, and that's where we try to lead with empathy in every place, both inside of the technology itself and in the ways that we engage with our customers.
Well, you're setting this space. It is not just a website, it's a service. It's a tool that people can leverage however they need to, and it can be customized, which is awesome because everybody grieves differently. Their needs are different. They come to a loss at different points. Sometimes it's sudden. Sometimes it's been years of, we've needed casseroles for 2 years before we even get to the death. That kind of support. So Mi Alma provides that ability to customize, which I think is incredibly valuable. Incredibly valuable. I don't like to see resources and generosity wasted. Right. So if you're taking over a frozen casserole, frozen food, and yet this family has had 15 people bring something like that this week and there's no more space in the freezer, something's going to get thrown away.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that I look at my own experience. I lost my grandfather 2 years ago in hospice. And what I didn't realize then, which I've now learned the term for it, I was in anticipatory grief. Grief had already set in. He was still with us, technically. He was still breathing. I'd visited him every day with my sisters. And my needs then weren't food. It wasn't money. It was memories. It was stories. It was legacy preservation. He was 4 Purple Hearts, 2 Bronze Stars, jumped out of helicopters, a true American patriot, a hero, both to this country and to us. And what I realized, and we were already building Mi Alma, but he was certainly a catalyst for us because it opened up my eyes to this idea that grief can set in at any moment. And for me, and for Mi Alma, what we realized is that end of life is an opportunity to kind of wrap your arms around a family, to support them in ways that emotionally they're thinking about, how am I going to tell this person's story? How am I going to keep this all in one place? So it's been incredibly rewarding for me to build a page for my big pop. Obviously, he passed 2 years ago, so we built it years later. But it gives us a sense of peace. And for me, when he died, I didn't care about food or money. I wanted people to learn about him. I wanted a place that I could send my friends and my colleagues and my extended family to say, just go read about how amazing this man was and why it hurt so badly, despite it being a relatively inevitable loss of life, that he lived this beautiful life. So I think that's the kind of the next layer of depth of Mi Alma. Sometimes it's not about action. It's about learning about someone. And I say often, Mi Alma is for the extraordinary ordinary. It's for the extraordinary ordinary teacher or pediatrician or war veteran. These people that have impacted hundreds, if not thousands of people's lives, that there's no place today until Mi Alma for people to deposit their stories and memories of that person so that the community can give and, like, again, wrap their arms around the family in a way that makes them proud, and proud that can be lasting, again, for future generations.
I love it. Jordan, what was your grandfather's name?
His name was Al Rudy.
I think it's so important to say the name and recall him and respect him that way. I love it that you obviously have so much respect and love for your Big Pop. Is that what you called him?
My Big Pop. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
He was something special.
And so now generations to come, family and friends can go in to his profile on Mi Alma and read about what he did with his life. That's an incredible gift to be able to share. So I want to talk about that. Long-term support. You mentioned that earlier, and ongoing engagement with those memories and that legacy. Why do you think that's so important to grievers?
It's interesting. When we were building Mi Alma and doing discovery on Mi Alma, we tried to be very intentional. We talked to a lot of different folks. We talked to doctors, we talked to spiritual leaders, we talked to psychiatrists and psychologists, because we wanted to build something that wasn't just a good business idea. We wanted to build something that could help people. And we wanted to build it in a way that was truly meaningful. So what I say all of this because what I learned from some of the psychologists we talked about is that there's two primary fears that someone has when they lose a loved one, especially if it's, God forbid, a child. Number one is the fear of forgetting special dates, special qualities, special stories, anecdotes, the things that made that individual special. And the second thing that people fear is the fear of that person being forgotten. And that truly that the world will move on. And like you mentioned earlier, which I strongly agree with, that people will just simply stop saying their name. So part of what we're after in our approach is giving people this lasting place that they can forever visit so that you can continuously say their name. Mi Alma is Spanish for my soul. And we love the name Mi Alma because we believe that with Mi Alma, while you may not physically be on this earth, so long as people continue to say your name and continue to tell your stories, you are in essence still here. And that's where we are after this, we know this. It is a very bold and for some people, it's an uncomfortable space to be in. But for us, we believe so strongly in this vision that everyone should have a place that you can revisit at any time to learn, to further engage, to ask questions about people so that you feel more connected to them.
Storytelling is part of human history.
It is.
That's how generations, several generations before us, that's how they knew who their grandparents were and the deeds, misdeeds, and adventures that their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents had. But I think as technology has evolved and we've gotten more disconnected, the world is smaller to us than it used to be. That storytelling ability and our ability to tell stories has been lost.
It's so true. And I'll tell you, I recently heard it's an African proverb that really stuck with me. And it's the proverb goes something like, when someone dies, it's like a library of stories slowly being burned down. And what we want to try to accomplish here is not letting those stories burn down, like put them somewhere. deposit them somewhere. And really, we talk about pictures and stories. One of the use cases we've seen the most since we've launched is people uploading speeches and eulogies from funerals and memorial services. Because in my experience, other than wedding, those are some of the most beautiful words ever spoken. But if you're not there, you never get to hear it. And even if you were, there should be a place that you can revisit those things. So I completely agree in the storytelling ability. And it is so interesting. We live in such a technology-driven world, yet sometimes it feels like there's so much noise that we forget to really get connected and to get deep. And that's what we think it's time for there to be a place to do that.
So why not make the technology work for us?
That's right.
Yeah. With Mi Alma and the page that you've made for your grandfather, your children's children will be able to read about him.
That's right.
Yeah.
And again, we believe strongly, and you said it earlier, the obituary, it's antiquated. And I read obituaries today of people that I've known, and it's, somewhere between 3 to 4 paragraphs of text. And I think that's not enough. These people that have walked this earth, that have done great things, they deserve more than 3 paragraphs worth of text. And that's what Mi Alma strives to be.
So it's where they were born, when they were born, who their parents were, anybody that's predeceased them, who's still left, the date of the death, and maybe a few biographical things in between where they went to school and where they worked. But does it actually capture the essence of the person? Not to be disrespectful to people writing obituaries, because I think a lot of lay people, family members they scramble. There's a death and all of a sudden it's like, who's going to do this? And somebody in the family either steps forward or they're voluntold that they're going to write the obituary. And then there's also money to consider. Obituaries are expensive. And if you want to truly capture and tell stories and share where they were and where they lived, what they did and who they loved, you're looking at $400, $500.
Sometimes more, depending on the publication.
Sure.
Absolutely.
And people don't read newspapers like they used to either. Print news is very different than what it was, 10, 15 years ago. So I think Mi Alma providing that opportunity, that space, is so valuable. The other thing that you said that struck me was talking about the eulogy or speeches, the eulogies that are done at a funeral and having those in Mi Alma as well. I will tell you that funerals that I've been to that were significant losses in my life, one specifically my grandmother, I could not tell you what was said in that eulogy.
Yeah.
I could not recall that. I think at that point in my loss, my grief was so intense that I could not focus on that, could not remember. I would have loved to have had a copy of that, a place to be able to go back and reread it. When I was at a place in my grief where I felt open to it and interested in it, where I could retain it.
It's a fog of confusion. And that's how we identify that grief that you're talking about. People the grieving family, especially if you're a primary griever, you are in a fog of confusion. So not only can you not remember it, think about it, when people are writing obituaries, oftentimes we've heard that people end up saying things that had they had more time, or had they not been in this fog of confusion and this overwhelming kind of sense of emotions, they would have said something completely different. Because it's so abrupt, even if the death is anticipated, the loss still is abrupt at the end. And when you're writing this obituary, there's so much pressure that people don't end up saying the things, oftentimes, maybe some, that people don't end up saying the things they really want to say. And that's where, again, creating this like dynamic experience that you can revisit at any time is really powerful.
I think it has a lot of meaning to be able to go back to it several times.
Yeah.
Because grief moves. There's a lot of discussion about when grief peaks and, And what we know now is it's somewhere between 18 and 36 months after the loss. But to be able to go back in and read that and remind yourself, here's how we paid tribute, here's what was written, here's what was spoken. I think that could be, for a lot of people in their grief, very healing and comforting.
Absolutely. Again, we live in such a fast-paced world. The world is faster than it ever was. And we have to be really careful about that. It's okay to sit and reflect and even to sit in your grief. And there's a way, even though everyone grieves differently, we know that you can grieve more healthy, if you allow yourself to remember and to be nostalgic. It's a healthy thing to go back and to allow yourself to sit in that, because it's actually what allows you to move forward. Too often we're moving too quickly through our lives, and that's what causes, honestly, a lot of mental health issues. And again, technology for good. We talk about Mi Alma being a piece of sympathetic and empathetic technology, and we will continue to strive to do so.
So I want to touch back on the loss of your grandfather. Your grandfather, if I'm doing the math correctly, died during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And what we know about the pandemic, and hopefully have learned from, is that there were a lot of invisible losses during the pandemic.
That's right.
And it was related to the fact that we were locked down or nobody was gathering. There were so many different reasons. I knew people, in fact, I had 2 losses myself in my own family during the pandemic that were sort of what I call invisible losses. There was no service, no nothing, an obituary that was short to the point, a funeral that did not happen. I had an aunt that died. No funeral, no gathering.
Yeah.
It's invalidating.
People vanished.
Yes.
It was horrible. Horrible. And truly, I mean this when I say we had been thinking about this idea and kind of formulating it in our minds for a long time. And then COVID hit, and it was so apparent to us it was time.
Right.
Because the world also was ready. We were seeing generations that typically weren't doing anything online do everything online. Suddenly everyone was comfortable on Zoom. And so we thought, okay, well, that's an opportunity, because the barrier for people to engage with this is even less than it used to be. We're obviously building for where the world is going, not necessarily where the world is today, although we think there's a lot of people that have and will continue to gravitate to this. But absolutely, Helen, that's a huge part of this. People vanished. And I believe strongly that it will be years before we see the true mental and emotional repercussions from individuals that didn't properly get to honor and celebrate their loved ones, because the whole experience was so bizarre. And everyone was so concerned with, well, how did they die? And what happened? Yeah. So absolutely. And with my big pop in particular, the last time I saw him was through a glass window. It was awful. And that's why, for me personally, I feel very strongly that I should work harder to remember him in the ways that he would want to. I think we talk about here, Mi Alma is about preserving people in their prime, because too often the way someone is at the end is not a representative of who they really are and how they want to be remembered.
Right, right. When I think about these invisible losses, what we know is that a lot of people die in isolation, because illness and decline and death are very isolating experiences for both the patient, the person who's dying, and for the immediate family, that caregiving unit. But the grief doesn't have to be invisible.
That's right.
The grief does not have to be invisible. And I think that's one of the beautiful side effects, although that is definitely your purpose in founding Mi Alma. But that grief does not have to just disappear. The stories, the life doesn't have to just disappear. Right. It can be put out there in perpetuity. Okay, so I want to ask you about your wish list for grief support in the U.S., but I want my listeners to know how they can engage with Mi Alma and actually set up a page.
Yeah, there's a few ways. So first, anyone's welcome, of course, to go to our website, mialma.com. You can create pages there for your loved ones. And most importantly, we talk about if you know someone experiencing loss, to create the page for them. Again, from a support registry perspective, we know that the primary griever is not in a place to oftentimes do anything more than they have to do. So if a friend or a close relative is someone that could leverage this and utilize this, go on and create it for them. That is like one of the most meaningful things you can do for somebody. We also partner with houses of worship and hospice groups around the country. What we have found is that with hospice groups in particular, they're there to serve the patient, certainly, but they're also there to serve the family. And we know that those needs pile up very quickly. So if there's hospice groups that want to talk about making Mi Alma available to their families, we would love that. And then houses of worship. We are working with churches and synagogues and mosques across the country. Again, these are institutions designed to support families during good times and in bad times. And they also serve communities that feel inclined to help somebody, especially when something is sad and tragic. So what we're already seeing is that Mi Alma becomes the place and the ritual, part of the rituals in which you bereave somebody, so that when you are looking to mobilize your church or synagogue community, that now there's one place to go. And again, it's a gift for the family that they have forever. Those are a few ways. And then, of course, we are on Instagram. So if anyone feels inclined to follow us at the.me.alma, we'd love to see you there as well.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'll have links in the show notes to the website, to your social, so the listeners can go straight in. So let's talk about your wish list. What's on your wish list for grief support here in the U.S., and where would you like to see it in 10 years?
Oh, I have a lot. I'll try to be brief. I think one is on the corporate HR side. I think that we have a lot of room to grow as a country in terms of how we view a bereavement policy, frankly. Right now, most people just kind of, there's a lot of country. I know California has a state law around it. They've done a good job. But most companies, they just take the position of, well, whatever they need within a week to 2 week period, we'll let that's acceptable. That's okay. But I really do think that we should be taking a closer look at the impact of grief in the workplace. Because again, in a culture that goes so fast, what ends up happening is there's a deterioration and there's an impact on quality of work when you go back too quickly. And there's this pressure, and then there's a tendency that we've observed and read about many times where people are over-functioning. And that over-functioning can appear to other people to seemingly be, oh, they're okay. They're doing fine. They're back at work. They're back at their tennis practice or their tennis,
Sure.
But over-functioning can be very, very dangerous long-term. So that would be one. And then the second has to do with just bereavement resources, not just in hospice, but also in hospitals. It's been really interesting to see, with hospitals in particular, they are designed to keep people alive. And so oftentimes they don't have a ton of resources for families when a loss occurs, because it kind of cuts against why they exist and their marketing message. So I would love to see, whether it's Mi Alma or other things, more organizations, more institutions that support grief and death start to look for more modern tools to support families. Because if you look at the tools available today, they don't meet people where they are. And we are a digital, technology-driven world. And it's time to level up the ways that we connect with people to meet them where they are, and not just the snail mail that you get sent out to say, I'm so sorry for your loss. We
Right.
can do better.
Right. I love it. That's a great list, just the two.
I'll be brief for once.
Oh, and I'm sure we could have another podcast about what's on our wish list for grief support in the U.S. But there is a national conversation around grief and bereavement and the cost, the toll that it takes on productivity and how much it costs. It's something like $7 billion worth of revenue lost in a year from that kind of thing. And we need to get better at having those conversations and supporting those grievers. So thank you for that thought. Jordan, thank you so much for taking time with me. I've never talked to a sports celebrity, so it's so nice to talk to Michael Jordan. But I'm so glad to get to know you and to hear about Mi Alma and to share this resource with my listeners.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
So you can see that Mi Alma is a unique resource. So there are legacy sites, right? There are places to upload stories and obituaries, and funeral homes have obituary sites. There are Mealtrain sites. There are GoFundMe sites. What Mi Alma has done is pull all of that together in sort of a one-stop grief support shopping place where you can support someone who's grieving, whether their person is still with them or has passed away or not, all in one spot. They sort of make it easy. And their claim to fame is they help people tell their story. Intergenerational storytelling. They supply what they call a support registry, which helps grieving families with needs that they have. And it's customized to the family. If they don't want food, or if they don't want flowers, all of that is there listed. It says specifically the family has declined receiving flowers. And it says here's where donations might be made, whether they need assistance with funeral costs or whether they would prefer someone make a personal donation to a charity. All of that is included on the page in Mi Alma. It's not about what the support people want or need. It's about what that grieving family needs, what the grievers need. The modern memory wall is a big part of Mi Alma. It's a place where memories are captured and they can be visited time after time by families and friends. Stories, eulogies, obituaries, any kind of tribute, photographs, you can post all of that there, which is just another wonderful way of leveraging modern technology to story, to tell stories and to share those, intergenerational storytelling. Mi Alma is there to partner with you as individuals or with hospice agencies, places of worship, communities of faith. You can partner with Mi Alma to either create one page or purchase a page for someone else as a gift, to gift it to someone, or you can partner with Mi Alma as a hospice agency, a community of worship, lots of different ways to utilize their services. So I would recommend that you check out mialma.com. It's mialma.com. See the work that they're doing. It's a great place to support grievers. Loss shouldn't be lonely. Be sure to catch the next episode of the Heart of Hospice podcast. You can find more episodes on theheartofhospice.com. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. You can connect with the Heart of Hospice on Facebook and Instagram and send me your questions or comments by email to helen@theheartofhospice.com. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.